Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another random review. And today's random review is Hands Over the City by Francesco Rosi from 1963, starring Rod Steiger. Yes, it's another Francesco Rosi film. It's not my fault, because these films are just very good. Yes, it's another Italian film, not my fault. The films are very good. This is a Eureka Masters of Cinema, spine number 87, Blu-ray and DVD, which I had to pay a little bit extra for because it is out of print, but it is Francesco Rosi, so I kind of had to. It is available also on Criterion DVD. I would assume it's on the Criterion channel or has been on the Criterion channel. And you should get a nice booklet as well. This film, like a lot of Rossi films that I've seen, is essentially about a man who is part of something but he's still alone, essentially. This opens up with Rod Steiger standing on a piece of ground to the north side of the site of Naples, which again is in the south of Italy, and as we know, if we watch enough Italian films of the 50s, 60s and 70s, we know about the north-south divide, how the north with Turin and Milan is deemed to be a lot more progressive compared to the south with Naples and Eboli. So this public ground is going to be sold to a private person, as in Rod Steiger, who runs construction. He's also on the council. And then we see, as he's building on this new ground, or preparing to build a new ground, one of an old building collapses, killing a couple of people and taking the legs from a little boy. Again, Rossi doesn't mess about with sentimentality or anything. And then we're thrust into the world of the council and elections and backroom dealings and uneasy allegiances. There is a cross-party investigation into how the land was bought, and Rod Steiger is under suspicion. Again, so there's a kind of investigation featuring people from the right and the left and the centre. Now obviously films about political corruption are hardly new to us looking back, but maybe in the 60s they were a little bit more surprising. But again, the real kind of power of this film is Rossi's ability to make what sounds like a dry subject interesting and compelling. You know, John Sayles has the same thing. If you read a John Sayles synopsis, it's like, why am I going to watch this? But it's because they're brilliant, and it's the same with Rossi. So obviously you have Hands Over the City, which doesn't sound that compelling. You have the Mattei case, or the Mattei affair, starring Volonte, which is about an owner of a gas company who wants to build a pipeline into the south, and it starts with his helicopter crash accident that might not actually have been an accident. Again, how do you make that compelling and interesting? Well, Rossi somehow does. Salvatore Giuliano, which starts off with the death of a kind of revolutionary, and it works its way back, just like Citizen Kane, to try and figure out what kind of person he was and how it all happened. Again, kind of dry, but Rossi manages to make it compelling. And then obviously Christ Stopped at Eboli, which I've done a random review of before, which is because it's amazing. Again, Chris Mohan recently talked about that as well. I'll put a link to his watch list, which features Christ Up to Boli. Again, a fairly dry synopsis, but Rossi makes it absolutely compelling. But back to Hands Over the City. Obviously, Steiger is dubbed into Italian, but there are times where it looks as though he is actually speaking Italian. Steiger is a little less Steiger than we're used to, and if you're familiar with Steiger, you know what that means. He's certainly not Duck-You-Sucker, Fistful of Dynamite, Once Upon a Time in the Revolution Steiger, which is probably up to about 12. He has a little bit, he's taken down a few pegs in Rossi's film, because again, he's not really the star, he's more an ensemble player. His character kind of drives the narrative, but there are long periods where he's not actually in the film. Again, Rossi kind of shoots most of these films that I've seen, at least, obviously with the exception of Eboli, which is just beautiful. It's more of a kind of docudrama type feel in these films, but this one's really interesting for the production design, as far as the residencies of the people in the council. You know, the mayor is more a figurehead as all the council members and potential mayors and stuff like that, and their residencies, the opulence of them. You know, one of the guys who is in the Centre Party, who's running to take over from the right, because the right is in power at the start of the film. His house is full of art, and he has one of the councilmen over who works in a hospital, and he's showing him all this art that he has, and then he shows him this room full of more paintings and more art, like a shrine. And he's saying, you know, it's lucky that in the past people did take pride or take joy from art, and he's like, that's lucky for me, because otherwise I wouldn't have these, which kind of suggests that he got them from ill-gotten gains, pretty much. There's another guy who is in charge of the right, and he's sitting outside in a pool with I suppose a 1960s version of a rowing machine, which is literally half a boat, and he's got his oar in the swimming pool. And when somebody's at his door, his butler comes and gets him, and then it takes quite a while to walk down the levels to actually get back into his house. So again, you just have this image of the opulence of the people in power compared with the people in the streets, the people in the slums, which we see. Again, Rossi was always left wing, but this is more of a balance. It's not just an attack on the right, it's pretty much an attack on the system itself. You know, obviously the meetings, there is a lot of shouting and gesticulating, so if you're not a fan of shouting and gesticulating, this film might not be for you. And Rod Steiger's office is one of the greatest offices in cinema history. He has a very nice view, but then on the other side of the room, it's just these huge big pictures of buildings. So even in his office, he's surrounded by these like huge buildings, and on his back wall, it's a map of the city, and just the way Rossi frames it, there's the harbour, so it's the harbour in the background is almost like fingers, and they're kind of reaching for Steiger's head. Plus the door into the office is actually on the map, so you literally go into the city to get out of the office, and in the office. So the production design has nice little touches which tells you a lot about the characters and also the power that's going on. That map behind Steiger in his office is very reminiscent of the map of the city that's behind Volonte in Elio Petri's investigation of a citizen above suspicion. It has that same vibe. Again, we do see the poor people in the slums, and again, because Naples is the south, they're kind of more cobblers and blacksmiths compared with, you know, there's talk of the people who go north and kind of have better skills and stuff like that. Because again, there is a real north-south divide which still exists today in Italy. But we see the slum area, the set piece where we see the building collapse is very effective. Again, it's kind of shot almost like a documentary. The scene where the mayor has served all these people an eviction notice, but of course there's nowhere for them to go because Steiger's new housing and new buildings aren't for those people. Not exactly sure who they're for, but they're certainly not for those people. So again, this is a film that we've perhaps seen before, but because when you make kind of overtly political films, I find personally it's better if it's not specific, because if it's specific to a certain event, I think one, it kind of ages it, and two, I think it doesn't really stand up to repeated viewings as much. Now obviously if corrupt politicians and backroom deals and uneasy alliances didn't exist anymore, then maybe, you know, we could look back at these and maybe have more distance to them. But the fact that political films like this from the 60s are still relevant today, it's pretty much like war films. You know, unfortunately, people still keep making war films, and it's like one day it would be quite good if war films were just redundant. And the same with politically, or films about political corruption or whatever. It'd be quite nice if they were redundant at some point, but doesn't seem that's going to happen anytime soon. But again, this perhaps isn't as great as Many Wars Ago by Rossi, or Christ Stopped at Eboli. But so far, all the Rossi films I've seen, which isn't a lot to be fair, I'm hopefully going to watch more. They're all like 4 stars and above out of 5 for me, and this one is no different. Again, it's a quote unquote dry subject matter, but he makes it compelling. Again, Steiger is really good without doing overtly Steiger things. Obviously, he is quite an operatic actor, so even wiping his forehead with a handkerchief can become really operatic. Putting glasses off and on can be quite the operation for Steiger. But again, it's also good the fact that it's not specifically against the right, it's not specifically against the left, it's not specifically against the centre. Rossi is attacking that whole mess, because you will during the kind of the kind of city hall scenes, you will kind of say to yourself, how do they actually get anything done? How do they decide on anything? Because they just spend the whole time bickering and like trying to score points off each other. So it's like, how do they get anything done? And they all must have very sore wrists, or very strong wrists, because they've been practicing so much with the. But all in all, it's a terrific film. Again, it's perhaps not absolute top shelf Rossi, but then his 5-star films, for me anyway, are like really, 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 really good 5-star films. Yeah, it's an interesting film. Again, Rod Steiger being an outsider, literally, as well as his character, who is in the political game, but again, as he says, he's more into I make buildings. In those other Rossi films that I've showed, again, they're about an individual in some form of system or other, and I think that's one of the things that go through Rossi's films, at least the ones that I've seen so far. So that's Hands Over the City. I keep wanting to call it Hands Across the City, but it's Hands Over the City. So you can let me know if you've seen Hands Over the City and what you think of it. how you would rate Steiger's performance in the ranking of over the top Steiger to understated Steiger. I don't think there's actually a thing of understated Steiger. I think he's always a little bit slightly showy. Is that a nice way of saying it? I mean, I'll be honest, sometimes you do think, I wish Volonte was in this, but again, that's just a personal opinion. Rod Steiger is very good in it, but that's just my Volonte bias coming out. Or perhaps Christopher Walken, I don't know. But thanks very much for watching. Again, please leave a comment below if you've seen Hands Across the City. Tell me which Rossi film I should really check out. I've still to watch Three Brothers. I have that in Arrow Academy. I've still to watch that one. So we'll see if there's a video for that. I'm not going to do every video on every Rossi film. It just seems that way. So thanks very much for watching. This is Solitude Ronin from Solitude Ronin Films, saying farewell.